Our last stop in our journey through chromosomes is to look a little bit more closely at the genes of the mitochondria and chloroplasts. So far, we've been very focused on the chromosomes, those 46 chromosomes that are located in the nucleus of each of the cells in our body. But let's not forget, there's also DNA in the mitochondria and chloroplast. So I think it'd be helpful to take a moment, hit pause, reflect on these three questions, and see if you can remember things that you learned about before. So pause. Did you pause? Pause. Pause. Okay, we're back. Um, Explain the theory of how mitochondria and chloroplasts became part of eukaryotic cells. So this was called the endosymbiotic theory. And you may remember when we talked about cells, we learned how there were these infoldings of the cell membrane that eventually gave rise to compartmentalized areas called organelles. And then all of a sudden, this little single smaller cell got engulfed into this larger cell, and that smaller cell was really good at producing energy, and eventually gave rise to the mitochondria. And since this little guy helped produce energy, it was helpful to this cell. This larger cell provided protection for the little guy, and so there was this symbiosis that developed. And so all of our mitochondria are the descendants of these ancestral hitchhikers. And then in another line, another bacterial cell got engulfed, and that one was able to do photosynthesis, and then these cells gave rise to modern plants. So basically, the mitochondria and chloroplasts were engulfed into larger cells and then became useful for producing energy. Describe the structure of DNA in the mitochondria and chloroplast, and what is it similar to? Well, remember, mitochondria and chloroplasts have a single circular chromosome inside them that codes for the genes of the mitochondria and chloroplast. And that is very similar to modern bacteria, where modern bacteria, remember, have these single circular chromosomes inside them. And some also, by the way, have these little extra rings of DNA called plasmids, which we'll talk about more in our next unit. But again, single circular ring, very similar to the ancestral bacteria that they had. How and when do mitochondria and chloroplasts divide? So as for the how, they use this process called binary fission. So here it is in prokaryotic cells. Single cell, it grows, it copies its DNA, it grows a little bit more, and then it splits into two identical copies. Mitochondria and chloroplasts do the exact same thing. They grow, they make a copy of their DNA, and then they split. And that is how the cell makes more copies of its mitochondria and chloroplasts. When does that happen? It actually happens in the G1 phase of the cell cycle, growth. So as the cytoplasm is growing, these mitochondria and chloroplasts are dividing as well, so that there's basically double the number, so that when that cell splits, the new cells both each have their own thing. Note that this is happening before the DNA in the nucleus is copied in the S phase, and certainly well before mitosis occurs. So for these genes of the mitochondria and chloroplasts, basically, they are passed on directly from the mother. And there was a little part of a screencast where I said you don't have to take notes on, so I'm sure you all skipped it, but I'll say it again, that when the cell divides in producing the eggs in females, it doesn't divide evenly. Most of the cytoplasm actually goes to one single product of meiosis. The other product of meiosis barely gets any cytoplasm. And so basically all the mitochondria and chloroplasts sort of stick with that egg and exist in that egg. The sperm really doesn't contribute much of anything to that egg other than the DNA. So the sperm basically attaches, it binds, it inserts its DNA, and then that's it. So all of the genes of the mitochondria come directly from the mother. So technically, you're not 50% mom and 50% dad. You're actually slightly more your mom. And so that's why this is a really good Mother's Day card that you could give your mother someday. And then, here's kind of an interesting for funsy kind of thing on Mother's Day. So, yeah, Mitochondria and chloroplasts pass through their mother. One example of this that you probably are familiar with is variegated leaves. This is called a hosta plant, and I'm guessing that if you don't have hostas in your yard, you've probably seen them in other people's yards. But that lightish color, that white color, is called variegation, and it's caused by mutation in a gene for pigments located in chloroplast DNA. And that should make sense that, okay, a mutation that prevents you from making chloroplasts, DNA, or I'm sorry, that prevents you from making pigments would give you a white color because you're not properly making the green pigments. And then it would also make sense that would be in the chloroplast DNA because those pigments are in the chloroplast as part of the photosystems. So kind of all making sense. You'll never look at a hosta the same way, will you? All right. That's it for this chapter. Thanks, everybody.